Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. If you are watching and listening, this time I actually tried to get in 15 minutes early and we had more technical difficulties. So kind of where we are right now. But so if anybody's looking to volunteer to do some tech or social media, we are hiring volunteer positions at My Quiet Cave. Email Kimberly at myquietcave.org. Good morning, Ellie.
Morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good now. I'm much better. Thanks for joining us. Let me check over here so I can see anybody that is wanting to ask questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please ask questions, react, comment. That would be awesome. So Ellie, brokenness. That's what we want to talk about today. And I know you're somewhat of an expert.
I've had my share of brokenness, and I treat brokenness for a living.
So you're deep in it. Yeah. So I know you have, I want to talk first a little bit about your story. I know we could take up the whole time talking about your story, but you have your own history with brokenness. I know you suffered an injury. You were just deep in the darkness. Can you kind of catch people up, those that are watching that aren't familiar with your story?
Sure, yeah. So I'll kind of get a little bit before that. I was working toward becoming a psychiatrist in the military, in the Air Force. So jumped through all the hoops of undergrad, med school, residency, and I tried my whole life to get to Colorado. I love the mountains, and I finally made it to Colorado. And in 2015, after I was doing a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship, I ended up sustaining a traumatic brain injury. It was a freak hiking accident, and I went headfirst into a boulder, broke this part of my, right above my eye open. You could see my skull, and just really took a huge hit. And I ended up not being able to go back to my fellowship. I was on convalescent leave or sick leave with the Air Force until they ended up retiring me because I couldn't read without getting a horrible migraine. I couldn't really look at a computer, phone. I couldn't read a menu at a restaurant. It was pretty debilitating. Insomnia, depression, anxiety. Within that period of time of me healing, I was raped and sexually assaulted. And it was just like one thing after another. I ended up having 4 more concussions within the year of my traumatic brain injury. I was sitting in the back seat of a car, and a deer ran in front of the car, totaled the car. And we were going about 80 miles an hour on I-70. And so it's just all these unrelated events, and I couldn't catch a break. And so I would get to a certain point of healing, and then I would have a setback. And then like I would finally say, oh wow, I'm not having, an intense migraine today. And then I would have a setback. And so it was just a horrible period of darkness where I was isolated. I had minimal contact with people because I just couldn't. And just not being able to read in this society is very, very difficult to navigate through. And then being able to figure out the healthcare system and trying to find treatment and trying to find healing. It's really hard to do when you can't read. And so my mom ended up basically living with me for a while and kind of helping me navigate through a lot of this stuff. But I went from fully functioning, helping people who were, had PTSD, depression, anxiety, and to the point where I couldn't help anyone and I couldn't even help myself. So it was a very debilitating experience where I felt completely and utterly broken, where I was helpless and hopeless. And except for my faith in God, that I knew that in some way, shape, or form, that he could bring his glory and light out of my darkness. And that's the only thing I could hold on to through it, because I couldn't do anything. And so it was a life of doing to a life of being. And it was a rough road to get there.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And you went from, like you said, treating people that had trauma and injuries and were broken to becoming that. I know a lot of times at least I've experienced in the counseling profession and the helping profession, sometimes people go into helping fields because they can relate in some way and they want to help people that have struggled like they have. But you kind of did it backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening experience that my whole life I was pushing things down, and I wouldn't allow myself to feel or to recognize any things that I need to deal with my own self-care, because I was helping other people. And so it was just years of pushing things down to help others. And then I got to the point where I couldn't push anything down. Those walls that I had put up as barriers to protect myself were obliterated. And so it was really, I was facing my own monsters or darkness in that situation, where I couldn't say, oh, well, I'm helping this person and I'm doing all this good work, and that will cover up any mistakes or failures that I have made. And I was able to kind of avoid any of those things, but I got to a point where I couldn't avoid anymore. And I had to be faced with my own issues, but I could, because I knew that God was there with me. And I actually felt him more because I wasn't blocking his love and grace with my own performance or achievements. So it was a really awakening time in my life to realize I don't have to provide or prove my worth to God or to anyone else, because God proved that I was worthy when he died on the cross for me, and that he knew all of my darkness and is more aware than I am and loved me through it. And I can face my own darkness because he's there with me, and his love is greater and his grace is greater. And so it's really thinking that I had it all together and I can help other people, but then realizing I don't have it all together, but I can actually help more people, knowing that, coming from that standpoint where but for the grace of God, I can be his vessel of light and love to others. And it's not me doing it myself, but it's me allowing God to do it through me and partner with me in that.
You say you didn't have, or you don't have to prove anything, because you know who you are. You don't have anything to prove to God. Like, you don't have to work for it. But did you believe that before?
No.
All of this happened? No.
And I think if you would have asked me that, I would say, oh, for sure. I don't have to prove anything.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, you knew that before in your head, right? I mean, you understood.
I wasn't living that out. I was living out that lifestyle of, I do have to prove my worth, and anything that is evidence against me being enough, that the world says, then I would fight against it and even try harder to achieve, to block that out, versus leaning on God and allowing him to be my advocate. And so it was just this, like, it was a disconnect. It wasn't completely integrated, where I had a thought and belief, but it wasn't fully lived out. And I didn't realize that disconnect until it was staring me in the face.
Yeah. But what a terrifying way to have to understand that and believe that. I think about distractions are a problem for a lot of people, and achievement. But then what happens when you're stripped of all of that? and you can't do anything but look up. But you couldn't even look up. You couldn't even open your eyes without being in pain or wanting to throw up. But I think also the last couple of months with everybody being isolated and a lot of distractions kind of being stripped away for many of us, being stuck at home, isolating at home, it's similar in a way, right? We're kind of forced to sit with our stuff.
Right. Yeah. And avoidance is always, it feels good in the moment, right? The enemy tempts us with those instant gratification times where, hey, you can choose this is going to grow and build your character, or you can choose this. It's the easy button where it's going to bring relief for a second, but it's going to be destruction after that. And so it's that I kind of had got the PhD course in how to go to God with your pain and issues. For years, it was like going through life where I grew up with a lot of policemen are in my family, and my grandpa is a World War II vet, and I have a lot of military and police, and my mom's a nurse, so just a lot of service people. And so growing up in an environment where if you show your emotions and any kind of like sense of weakness, which is not really weakness, but it's just that culture, right? The push it down, you don't have time to deal with it, move on.
Yeah.
And so it's just really, what I learned was I can't show emotions. I can't show what I'm truly feeling, because if people see that, they're not going to trust me, or they're not going to have confidence in me. And so even like going through med school and residency, they're just having this like stoic face, because if you show any kind of reaction to how someone's talking to you, then they can perceive it in the wrong way and react in a way that you can't control the environment. You can't truly help them. And that is completely a lie. And so it's just this mentality of push it down, don't let anybody show your emotion, and then you can be professional and do what you need to do. So after my brain injury, I couldn't control my emotions. Like it would just come out. And there was just this disconnect with being able to push them down, and I couldn't push them down anymore. And so I had to figure out, okay, now that I'm feeling all these emotions and the weight of them, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
I can't push them down anymore. And so I had to learn how to feel those emotions when they come, and give them to God, and feel them with God, and pray through them with God, and go to Him for the comfort as soon as I can, because the more I delay that, the stronger they're going to get. And so it was, in the past, there would be distractions, right? Just work harder, go for a long run, watch TV or do whatever. And that will be your distraction. And then the emotions will pass as you're distracting yourself, versus I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I'm just forced to sit with this. So what do I do? And so the healthiest thing is to feel your emotions yourself. And if you have an outlet like the God of the universe, who can take every single emotion possible and who can absorb it for you, then go for it, right? And we have the God of all comfort, who can comfort us in our deepest needs. And He's the only one that can fully satisfy us. And so why aren't we going to Him? Why are we using all of these temporary things that will give us this fleeting sense of comfort, and then they're gone in the next moment?
Now, you and I believe that, because I know you. You're a friend, and I know what you believe. And I think anybody listening understands what you believe. But what about people listening that don't have that don't have a belief in the God that we believe in, and they're feeling all these emotions? Maybe they've been through trauma. How do you treat that? Or what do you say to that?
So cognitive processing therapy is one of the main therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder for those traumatic memories. And there's several other therapies, but within that therapy, it talks about manufactured emotion and how manufactured emotion is where we experience emotions when we're younger and we don't deal with them. We ignore, we push them down, and we hold on to them. And they end up building and building and building and creating this big monster inside of us until we experience those emotions again. And at some point, our bucket gets so full that it starts overflowing. And so when we get angry, it's explosive anger because we never dealt with the anger from our childhood. And so each time you feel anger and you push it in that bucket, as it starts seeping out, it's going to come out sideways on other people. And so cognitive processing therapy, non-religious, nothing to do with God. It's just the psychological piece to it of the secular world. And so saying how these are the emotions, these manufactured emotions, they're not true emotions. They're just bottled up and become more intense the longer that you store them. And so when you're, the way to process those emotions is to recognize what thoughts are keeping these stuck. Like, so they call them cognitive distortions. Like cognitive behavioral therapy has all these thoughts where they're lies that we've been believing that aren't true. And so with respect to identity, with respect to control, with respect to the world. So some of them would be like an all or nothing thought of the world is all bad. I can't trust anyone. Or
everybody hates me.
Everybody hates me, or I'm hopeless, I'm helpless. I have no control over anything. I have no power over anything, like those kind of all or nothing things. And so what you do is you start chipping away at those thoughts that are keeping those emotions or triggering those emotions and keeping them stuck. And so as you're going through, you're learning how to effectively process those emotions in real time and then deal with the power that comes with them with respect to your thought life. And so it's kind of going through, you're learning how to self-soothe, how to experience those emotions in a healthy way and have a healthy outlet, whether it's grounding techniques, breathing techniques, being able to focus on mindfulness, and just being able to calm that sympathetic tone, that fight or flight down to a normal level. And so you're dealing with all of that, but also dealing with those cognitive distortions, those thoughts that are keeping things stuck, and being able to recognize I can feel anger and not fall apart. I can feel sadness and that's not weakness. I can feel these emotions and they're not going to last forever. There is a certain period of time where I'll feel them and then they'll dissipate. But if I never allow myself to feel them, they're going to grow and grow and grow. And it's going to take a lot longer for those emotions to dissipate. That would be the secular approach.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I kind of see how trauma ties into all of this. When we think of trauma, a lot of times or we'll think of PTSD, we think of veterans, first responders, but trauma can be something like, childhood trauma, kind of living in an environment where there's a lot of fighting or an abusive parent or a parent with some kind of substance use issue. And how would that play into maybe an adult that now has anger issues? How would somebody think, I guess, how could you speak to that? Maybe, me as an adult, I've got issues where I'm like feeling all these things all of a sudden. I don't know what to do with that. How could that connect with trauma that I don't even consider it to be trauma?
Yeah. So if you use a definition of trauma as anything that overwhelms your system, and you don't know how to deal with it, that could be like not the life and death threatening situation, but it is still like a form of trauma. And so how did you deal with that situation and those emotions in that situation? and how did you learn to adapt? And a lot of times our survival kicks in, where we see things that are similar that happened when we were younger, and we say, hey, I need to avoid that at all costs because I know what happens when that happens. And so it's this just pattern of avoidance, but ultimately
avoiding a situation. Sorry, avoiding a
Mhm.
situation or avoiding feeling.
So it could be both. It could be
Okay.
avoiding a situation where, say you had an issue with an abusive father, and the abusive father kind of ingrained in you that men aren't safe to be around. And so your whole life you avoid men. That pattern of behavior is ultimately going to end up being unhealthy, right? You're going to avoid all men, and it's not going to be a healthy lifestyle for you because you're constantly living around this avoidance pattern. And so when you're able to recognize, okay, there's certain men that aren't safe, but not all men, right? And so you're able to kind of be more flexible with your thought pattern and see, okay, it's not all, it's some, and there's some characteristics and red flags that I need to watch out for, but I don't have to avoid all men in my life. And so that's just kind of a random example, but recognizing that what your thought patterns are and what's restricting you. So what is there anger? Is there bitterness? Is there resentment? Are there things that you're harboring against certain people or in your life, or certain situations where you're not going to go there and you're avoiding all of that? And so that's ending up enslaving you to that pattern of life versus bringing you freedom to say, you know what, I can have relationships with men, and I know that not all of them are going to harm me, but I can also trust myself that I can start learning how to see those red flags and act on them versus having this global thought pattern of all men are unsafe, something like that.
Right. Which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
To do the work and to find the blocks and to work through that.
Yeah. And so, and I've get my own therapy, and I feel like it's important for everyone to have therapy because we can't do this alone. And we need other people, like people are like mirrors to us, and they help us see things that we're dealing with or that we need help with. And they can see things, they can kind of help us get out of our head, because we have those patterns, and it's hard for us, if that's all we've known, to recognize there's something different, that we can think something differently. And so it's really helpful to have someone who's trained to kind of walk beside you through that, to help you through those stuck patterns and through those traumatic memories, and to kind of help bring that comfort and guidance in that tough time.
So in wanting to work through trauma, you would highly recommend, obviously, somebody that specializes in trauma and specializes in helping you move through that. So let's talk about brokenness, spiritual brokenness, because not everybody understands what we mean. That can be a very Christian term to say brokenness. Can you just define that for me, of how you understand that?
So brokenness is basically when we recognize that there are situations where we're powerless, right? And so some people go throughout life where they don't have a lot of situations where they're powerless. Like they can kind of take control, and they can do what needs to be done. But until they come across a situation where they can't control, that's when they start recognizing their humanity, that they aren't all powerful, that they have some kind of inability to excel in that area. And so with brokenness, it's basically recognizing that we aren't God, and that there is a disconnect there, that we can't be perfect, and we are fallible. And it can be within the Christian faith, brokenness helps us recognize how unconditionally loved we are by God, and how accepted we are, and how amazing our God is. Because when Jesus came, when God came down in the form of man, Jesus, he became broken, utterly obliterated and crushed on the cross, and suffered the complete wrath of God for all the sins of the world. And he did that, and it says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He did that because of his joy of us, and just having a relationship with us, not expecting us to give to him, to achieve for him, but just connecting with us. And so when we can see that our God became broken for us, so that one day we would be with him and be completely whole, that is what allows us to face our own brokenness and be okay, because he's making us whole as we're connected to him, instead of being stuck in our broken state. And so our desire is to fix our brokenness on our own. And it's like trying to fall asleep. When you have insomnia, the more you try, the harder you try to fall asleep, the worse it gets.
The more awake you are. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like the harder we try to fix our brokenness and to make what we've done wrong right, the more we realize we can't, because we keep failing and we keep messing up. And so when we can look to what God did for us and say, you know what, he became broken. Like, broken and slaughtered for me, so that I wouldn't have to be broken, so that I can live in his wholeness. And so that allows us to say, God, find any brokenness in me and transform that into your wholeness. And the more I face my brokenness, I can look to him and say, I know you're going to heal this part of me, and I want you to heal this part of me. And what else is in me that is a stuck point or something where I'm struggling with, and I'm holding on to it and trying to prove my own worth in that area, or trying to make my wrongs right, and allow him to make my wrongs right, because that's what he does, and that's what he did.
But that goes against just our nature. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Like wanting to be hurt, wanting to be to a point of brokenness. Mm-hmm. We want to fix things. We don't want to feel bad, or what we would call bad emotions. We don't want to feel uncomfortable emotions. Mm-hmm. And that's so hard. So how do you do that unless everything really is just taken away from you? Yeah. Or why do we even want that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that with my journey, I got to a point where I didn't really have a choice but to stare my brokenness in the face. But looking back, like all along, I knew there was that brokenness there. There was that mentality of, you know, those thoughts in your head of, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not fit enough, you're not, like, fill in the blank enough. It's always going in our heads. And it's our desire of, are we going to try and prove it wrong? Or are we going to rely on God and him proving it wrong for us when he died on the cross? We're worth the blood of God. And so it's just that game and that constant fight and struggle of, are you going to try to fix yourself? And so I got to a point where there was no way I could fix my situation. I tried and tried and tried. Like, how can I not read? How can I get myself to read again and not have a migraine? How can I break this cycle? I tried all kinds of medications. I tried hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Like, I tried all kinds of things, months of treatment, and nothing worked. And so it was just recognizing that I can't fix myself, and I am broken, and I can't fix my brokenness. But all the while, what I couldn't see was the work that God was doing in my soul, where he was fixing my broken soul. And he was helping me find healing on the deepest level to see I don't have to prove my worth. I don't have to do this striving every day of my life. That's exhausting. I can rest in God proving my worth. And I can live out of that freedom versus being enslaved by this mentality of I have to make my wrongs right and I have to fix myself. And so that freedom that God brought me through that suffering was worth the suffering. I don't know if I would have said it in the middle of the suffering, but looking back, I mean, the transformation he brought to me and that deeper healing of this, like I didn't like myself at all. Like I was a slave master. I hated myself. Like at one point I'm like, if I were a person, I would not be my friend.
Wow. That's a strong statement,
Yeah.
Ellie.
Yeah. And so I went from that to being able to receive God's love, and out of that love, starting to love myself and starting to be okay in my own skin. And that was what the suffering brought. That's the transformation, when you see your brokenness and you see the solution to your brokenness, which is God.
Yeah. And it's so much easier, of course, looking back to say, yes, it was all worth it. And any transformation is really hard. It's not easy. Otherwise it wouldn't be transformation. Right. What happens when we see other people going through this? When we suspect maybe that's what's happening with our friends or loved ones or spouses, maybe they're getting to a point or going through that transformation. That's really hard to watch. That's really hard to watch the people we love suffering. And seeing things taken away from them and stripped from them. And we want to help. I know as a helper, I want to reach out and take that away from them. I want to lift it up and help carry that burden. Where do we draw that line? We're wanting to help people that we love and help ease their suffering, and then allowing them, or just recognizing maybe, they need to walk through that in order to heal. Where's that line?
Yeah. Well, when my mom was there with me through my struggle and that darkness, it was extremely hard for her. And I'll never know how hard it was because I wasn't in her situation, but just kind of hearing her talk about it, or the interaction with me where I wanted to be independent, but I was dependent on her. And so there was a lot of resentment and bitterness that would come out on my part, because I didn't want it to be like that. I didn't want to have to depend. It was almost like I was in a child again, right? Because I couldn't do a lot of things. And her being there was kind of a reminder of, I can't do any of this stuff. And so then there was also that point where she is a helper. She was a newborn intensive care nurse for 30 years. And that's what she does, is she helps. And she helps take pain away and comfort. And so she wanted to offer those solutions. And so we went through, it was a long journey where it was some heavy, intense arguments, especially when I was figuring out how to control the emotions that I had stuffed my whole life. And so it was really working together with her to say, sometimes I just need to vent. And sometimes I just need someone there. And I don't need solutions all the time. I don't need you to give me all of these possible solutions. And so it was kind of coming up with a code of me saying, hey, I need a vent right now, or I need a solution. I need help right now. And so it was kind of us working together to say, this is what I need. Or if I didn't say that, saying, do you need a vent, or do you want a solution? And so that kind of would help prevent a lot of the upfront arguments. And then the other piece is just having patience. When you look at the book of Job, his 3 friends came and sat with him, and they lasted a while, but then after a week, they started talking and they started trying to offer solutions, and it just went downhill from there. And if Job had asked for solutions, and wasn't just venting and just distraught, maybe that would have been different, but it was more of just needing that companionship and needing that comfort and needing someone who is there and willing to help, but is also aware that if you need help, ask for it, and helping you be the advocate instead of kind of enabling that sense of helplessness. And so there's kind of that balance there of how can I be there for my loved one and be patient and know that their pain and suffering, sometimes it comes out in the wrong way, but it's not personal. And knowing that you can be there for that person and try to navigate through how can I help this person, but how can I also empower them to be their own advocate and have that balance. But it is extremely hard.
It is hard, especially if there weren't a lot of physical things maybe they're going through. What if it's a lot of psychological, emotional suffering they're going through? Maybe they have a recent mental health diagnosis, or there is some trauma, or there's some addiction issues going on there. What happens when our loved ones are wanting more from us than we know how to give? Or then is like maybe we don't have those boundaries, right? I have a loved one that's struggling and suffering from something, and maybe letting them go through, well, we know letting them go through the process is good, but letting them and allowing them to have those consequences to certain things in order for them to grow. But I want to jump out and help. Like if it was my child, struggling with something that I know in the end, yes, it would probably make her stronger, but it's really hard for me to not want to fix it for her. What do you say to that?
Well, if it's a mental illness or psychological issue, a lot of having a professional that you can talk to and ask questions, that recognizing your own limitations of how much can I do in this situation to help, and how much is a hindrance. And if I don't know the question, I need to ask. And so helping someone navigate with you through that, as well as being able to set those appropriate boundaries. And if you don't know what those boundaries are, to be able to have someone that you can ask as well. Because every situation is different. And I wish there was like a clear cut answer. Okay, with this situation, do this. But because everybody's different, every situation is different. It's just recognizing your own limitations and recognizing that with respect to a lot of life, we have this illusion of control where we can control more than we can, and recognizing that there is that space there that we just can't do it. And we need either to ask for help or to just be that companion and just sit with them, and just suffering with someone and sharing in their sufferings in that way, and just having them see that you really care. That can do more for them than trying to solve it, 50 times.
Yeah, right. So seeking help from a professional, either as the person struggling and suffering themselves, or as a loved one who's a supporter, seeking out guidance, being mindful and remembering boundaries, recognizing our own limitations and what we can do and what's appropriate to do. And then just being able to sit with someone who's suffering. And that's the hardest part, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you want so badly to do something and to fix it, and know that you can't. And then you start facing your own sense of helplessness. And what do we do with that? We try to avoid or cover it up or fix. And so that's just going to make things worse. with that loved one. And so it's just recognizing that if I'm here with this person and we're seeking the right avenues for help, but there's certain situations where sometimes it just takes time. Like with even with respect to therapy, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes time to learn. It takes time to grow. It takes time to learn. These are the maladaptive patterns I've been using, and now I need to start adopting these healthy coping skills. But it takes time to teach your body and your brain to use those. Or with medications, it takes 2 to 4 weeks to start noticing improvement with a lot of the antidepressant medications. And so it takes time. What are you going to do during that time? Making sure that your loved ones are safe is the priority. And just being with them and taking care of making sure their basic needs are taken care of and met. But outside of that, it's just that waiting period.
Waiting. And we're not good at waiting. I'm not good at waiting. We're not patient people.
Mm-hmm.
We want everything now. And if things aren't working, we think God's not working or the medication's not working. That's really hard. I'm going to check over and see if there's any questions going on. Recognizing and adhering to our own limitations are the biggest obstacles for most family members. Somebody commented. Yes, that is hard. Because what does that say about me if I can't help someone, or admitting I have limitations?
Mm-hmm.
So brokenness, getting back to just this bigger idea of brokenness, is this something that we're all going to have to go through in order to grow spiritually and grow as people? Does this happen to just some people? I mean, I know we saw it in the book of Job. We've seen it in the Bible. We've seen it in people. What?
I don't mean to be morbid or anything, but
oh no.
if you think about it, everyone is going to die, right? Death is going to happen to everyone. And so everyone will experience some sort of loss in their life if they have any kind of relationship at all. And we don't want to think about that. We push it out of our minds all the time, but it is the reality of life. Things die around us all the time. We are in the process of decaying.
Yeah.
And so it's just recognizing that we aren't going to live forever in this body, in this world, right? It's the inevitable. And so we will experience suffering at some point. We will experience loss, grief, even if it's just the loss of my 20-year-old body to my 70-year-old body, right? It's just that difference of, well, this is what I could do and now I can't.
Yeah.
And grieving that loss. And so it's that inevitability of recognizing that we aren't invincible. And there are the parts of us that are broken. And there's a really good verse, and it's 2 Corinthians 4:16-18. So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away. Our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so it's just recognizing that we're bigger than our physical bodies, right? We are, there's more to life than what we can see. And so when we can start seeing that we have a growth in character and our soul is developing and transforming, we're becoming creatures of more of love and selflessness and compassion. And the more traumas that happen, we have a choice. Are we going to run and hide and try to protect ourselves? Or are we going to lean into that suffering and see what God is bringing out of that suffering? It's like refining, bringing that diamond out of that rock, and recognizing that it's got to be chiseled, right? If you have a vine, it's got to be pruned, or it won't grow properly. It won't produce the right fruit. And so it's just recognizing that pain is going to come and it's inevitable in this life, and we can avoid as much as possible, but it's going to find us. And so what are we going to do in that pain? Are we going to grow through it? Or are we going to find whatever we can to stunt our growth and be stuck in the same miserable pattern? And so just knowing that eyes wide open, there will be suffering, but we can have growth and transformation through that suffering, and be lights to the world and help them through their suffering. Because I couldn't help someone the same way had I not gone through my journey that I can now, because I understand on a deeper level what they're going through. And so you can be a greater comforter when you've been through your own suffering than you could be when it hasn't touched you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I don't see any questions going on here, and I think that's an awesome stopping point or a place to end, because I can't think of anything else to add to that. Yeah, thank you. Plus, my kids just got in from the park, so it's about to get really loud in here. But is there anything that you can think to add that I haven't asked you, or you wanted to kind of expand on?
I don't think so. There's a really cool poem that I found. I'll just read that. It's called The Dark Side of Love by an unknown author. Is there no other way, O God, except through sorrow, pain, and loss, to stamp Christ's likeness on my soul? No other way except the cross? And then a voice stills all my soul, as stilled the waves of Galilee. Canst thou not bear the furnace, if midst the flames I walk with thee? I bore the cross, you know its weight. I drank the cup I hold for thee. Canst thou not follow where I lead? I'll give thee strength, lean hard on me. And so I just really felt like that poem is kind of this this challenge of, what are you going to do when you face suffering? Are you going to lean on the all-powerful God who created heaven and earth, who is inviting you to lean and take in his power and be able to conquer it with him? Or are you going to avoid the suffering or face it alone? And so it's that choice that we have every day. What are we going to choose? Are we going to choose to be our own protector? Or are we going to allow him to be our protector? And so that's something where my whole life I was my own protector. Mm-hmm. Even though I had a relationship with God, I didn't realize how much I was protecting myself until my armor was gone. Yeah. So now I can lean on him when I face trials, and it's so much better. I don't have to fight on my own, and I can lean on his power and his grace to transform me through it. And so that's that daily choice that we have that opportunity to make. And especially with, pandemic and COVID and all these restrictions and precautions, and there's a lot, it's just enslaving in and of itself. And so how can we lean in to God for freedom and to see something greater than what we can see physically with our eyes?
Yeah. And sometimes not just daily, but moment by moment.
Yeah.
We have that choice. And that's what you do. You help people and lead people in that way too, in your practice and what you do. So if you want to take just a moment, I'd love to highlight your practice.
Yeah. So I have a practice in Wheat Ridge right now. It's mostly telemedicine, but it's called Eden Psychiatry, EdenPsychiatry.com. And I treat all ages, and you don't have to be a Christian or any religion. I treat everyone, and I have a lot of tools that I've found myself and that can help. And I kind of have this holistic approach where I have some nutritional things that can be helpful. There's people that come to me, they're like, I absolutely won't take a medication. And so we can try to work around that as much as we can. And then also do therapy as well. And I also have a nonprofit, Advancing Warriors, where we help veterans, first responders, law enforcement to have support groups so they can get out of isolation. And we go through an 8-week group. And a lot of that still right now has been virtual, and hopefully we'll get back and have the physical group, but just trying to navigate through the precautions. But we have those groups that can help people lean on each other and lean on God through those traumas that they've faced and the darkness and evil that they see on a daily basis or they've seen in combat, and to be able to just share their story or start talking through whatever they're comfortable with and hear that they're not alone and they don't have to walk it alone, and that they can learn healthy coping skills and things to start processing the traumas and know that it's possible to process those traumas, and that you can find healing and freedom that you never thought was possible. And we have a lot of awesome testimonies about that, and examples about people finding healing and finding that, okay, I can trust these people. These people aren't that bad. And I can trust God. And so it's just kind of, it's awesome watching people on their journey, finding healing and growth.
It is. I love watching that. I'll put a couple of links below. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put this on YouTube. So if any of you are just tuning in now, you can watch the whole thing. We can share it. And I'll post a couple of links to Advancing Warriors, and also to Ellie's practice, Eden Psychiatry. I'll put that in the link. So Ellie, again, thank you so much for being with us today. So thanks for being here, and thanks for everybody that watched.
Thank you.